As an American, I know that our reputation around the world is sometimes a teeny bit spotty. We've done a lot of cultural and geopolitical damage that we need to atone for, but nowhere has that damage been more harmful than in our many, many unsuccessful adaptations of good British television shows. From Skins to Broadchurch to Life on Mars to Coupling to The Inbetweeners, our track record in this field is not great, but what's perhaps even more damaging is when American adaptations are successful. Think about it. We took The Office, a pretty melancholy depiction of menial paper company employees eking out minor moments of happiness in a world that's dehumanizing and depressing, and transformed it into a warm-hearted look at a gang of lovable goofs who turn this paper company into a home and ultimately find all the happiness they could ever want right there.
Everything I have, I owe to this job. This stupid, wonderful, boring, amazing job.
And so, when production started on an American adaptation of one of my favorite British sitcoms, Ghosts, I got a little concerned. Not necessarily because the show might be bad, end up getting cancelled, and become instantly forgotten. No, I was worried what would happen if the American version of Ghosts was successful. What if it ended up overshadowing the uniquely British original? As a fan of the BBC show, could I live down the legacy of an Americanized Ghosts if it was a hit? Well, guess what? It was a hit. And it's certainly been Americanized. Very Americanized.
Oh, he's just the best! He's just the best! Oh, yeah, do that again! Okay.
But I think the ways in which this quintessentially British show has been changed are worth examining, because today's not a day for complaining, but for understanding. And so let's take a look at what makes a British show and an American show so fundamentally different, and figure out how two very different shows based on the same high-concept premise can both be, well, pretty good. 1. What is Ghosts? The premise of Ghosts is both wonderfully simple and requires a full episode and a half to establish. Basically, a young woman and her husband inherit a large home that's been filled with ghosts from a variety of different historical eras. The woman hits her head, which renders her, and only her, able to see ghosts, and that's where the wacky shenanigans begin.
Suppose you've seen a body anywhere on your...
A lady pinches. Whores use rouge.
A lady does not hold a carrot like that!
Out, get 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 out.
There is an enormous amount about this premise that is culturally specific to the UK. First, the idea of an old historic country home in some state of disrepair is, I think, something that's more common in the country that has a preponderance of centuries-old buildings, and the idea of a normal, lowish-class woman inheriting such an estate has a degree of class consciousness that I'm not sure translates very well to America, because before you even get to the idea of ghosts, it's just kind of funny that this woman has basically lucked into inheriting this home because of an obscure family tie that she didn't even know about. And it says something about the very British idea of family titles and inherited class status. Similarly, because the UK has a lot more historical periods to play around with, from the Georgians to the prehistoric to the Edwardian to the Tudors to the Second World War to the Stuarts to the 80s, the variety of potential ghost characters is enormous. British history is, well, really complicated, and features a number of wars, invasions, and distinct cultural and social eras. The United States? Less so. And because the United States is so large geographically, a lot of our interesting historical events didn't happen in the same location, which means the relevant ghosts can't inhabit the same building. It's plausible that a British ghost of a caveman would have died in the same spot as a Stuart-era witch trials victim. But in the United States, major historical events happened all over the place, so you can't have ghosts representing them all in your show. I think because of this problem, in the American adaptation, half of the main ghost characters end up being from the 20th century. And this diminishes one of the key comedic components of the original show, the idea that ghosts from hundreds of years apart are being forced to cohabitate in a ridiculous, odd couple-esque living arrangement. The comedic potential of a ghost from the year 2000 hanging out with a ghost from the year 1985 is just inherently less than a captain from World War II being forced to live with a beheaded tutor. The American version of Ghosts also makes the very American decision of sidelining the issue of class more or less entirely. In the UK show, the issue of class is often front and center, as we see servants and noble people living together. Plague victims are cohabitating with a politician, a military officer is living with a working-class scout leader. But in the American version, well, let's just say that pretty much all of that is gone. And so the US adaptation has eliminated, either by choice or by necessity, a number of the most comedically fertile areas of the original show, and to account for this, the American version has to approach both its comedy and its storytelling in a very, very different manner. 2. American storytelling. To begin with, let's talk about the way in which the original UK series tells its stories, because it is very British, or at the very least, it's very un-American. The plots of each episode are pretty simple and low-key, and seem purposefully designed to minimize any interpersonal conflict or drama. For example, in one episode, Mike, the human character who can't see ghosts, finds a recipe for a potion that will let him see them. It doesn't work, but Mike mistakes a visitor to the house for a ghost, and that's it. That's the end of the story. Meanwhile, in another room, all the other characters are sitting around in a circle and talking to one another. That's it. That's the episode. All of the humor, the drama, the pathos, the emotional catharsis doesn't come from an escalating plot or increasingly dramatic stakes. It comes from watching these characters just interacting, hanging out with one another. Maybe there's a problem that they have to solve, but just as likely, maybe there isn't. It is essentially a hangout show where we're watching because we like these funny characters and we want to be around them for 30 minutes. In traditional American television, there is a formula to sitcom storytelling. You've got an A plot and a B plot. Each plot needs to escalate over the course of an episode, becoming bigger and more outrageous, with cliffhangers usually timed to commercial breaks. Because of this, the American version of Ghosts adopts a much more plot-centric style of storytelling. Okay, so here's an example of an American episode of Ghosts. The human character, Jay, has a sister, Bella, who's coming to visit, and if you were to stop right there, that would be enough for a UK episode of Ghosts. In fact, there is an episode of the show where that is the entire plot, just family members coming to visit. Humorous things happen, but the plot just kind of ends there. Just a family comes to visit. That's enough. But the American version complicates things. See, here it turns out that Jay's sister, who has recently broken up with her boyfriend, is visiting so that she can connect with a man who she's been texting online via a dating app. Well, it turns out that the man is actually one of the ghosts who's been using an iPad to do some online dating. Well, the sister discovers the iPad and believes that her brother made the account. She gets angry at him, and in order to overcome this misunderstanding, the sister needs to have the existence of ghosts revealed to her. Of course, she doesn't believe it, so they've got to stage an elaborate exhibition to prove that ghosts do exist. Meanwhile, the Scoutmaster ghost Pete has a crush on the singer ghost Alberta, but he doesn't want her to know, so he's pretending to date a cholera victim ghost named Nancy. Well, Nancy's pretty annoying, forcing Pete to sleep on the floor and generally acting like a jerk. This in turn forces Pete to become more assertive, which it turns out is what Nancy wanted all along, but this assertiveness causes all the other ghosts to fight, which causes him distress. He then tells Nancy that he likes not being assertive, and she congratulates him on standing up to her, which results in her pretending to break up with him and leaving to live back downstairs with all the other cholera victims. That is a lot. And also, fun fact, episodes of The American Ghosts are about 10 minutes shorter than the British show, so events are happening pretty fast, and this leads to something very interesting. 3. The American show's greatest strength. I don't dislike the American version of Ghosts. I don't know if I've made that clear. I don't like it as much as the British version, but I certainly don't dislike it, because while the American version loses a lot of the elements that made the British show so wonderful, it also adds something that I think the British show really lacks, and that is character development. In the British show, the various characters are more or less caricatures. They are very broadly drawn, with simple, easy-to-identify core features. There's the prissy noblewoman, the slimy conservative politician, the happy-go-lucky scoutmaster, the soppy and romantic poet, etc., etc. And those characters are more or less static. Over the course of the show's 3 seasons, very little about them changes. You could mix up the episodes in any order you like, and it wouldn't make a difference. Kitty is Kitty, Fanny is Fanny, the captain is the captain. Even when we learn more about a character's backstory, like how Kitty was mistreated by her family, or how Thomas died in a duel after his cousin schemed to marry the woman that Thomas liked, nothing about the characters changes. Nothing about the way they behave, the way they interact, the way they view the world shifts. But in the US version, the characters develop over time. And so we get the closeted Revolutionary War officer Isaac discovering that a fellow soldier who he had feelings for is also a ghost, and over time Isaac comes out to one of his fellow ghosts, admits he has feelings for someone, comes out to the entire house, and begins a relationship with someone. And as much as I love the UK version of the show, we're 3 years into it, and they're still retreading the same jokes about their equivalent character, the captain, being secretly gay and not wanting to admit it, and the static nature of the characters can eventually start to wear thin, which leads us to this. 4. So, which is better? The UK version of Ghosts is an all-time classic. It's a show that I've rewatched multiple times and that I'm probably going to revisit for many years to come. The US version is, well, it's still finding itself. It's only finished its first season, and it would be unfair to predict what its legacy will be. Maybe it will run for a decade and become the next Office. Maybe this time next year it will be cancelled and forgotten. But comparing how these two very, very different shows tackle the exact same premise is highly instructive for how different sets of writers can approach writing a sitcom, and how neither approach is inherently better or worse than the other. There are multiple ways to tell this story, multiple ways to explore this comedic premise, and multiple ways to make it a success. And by comparing and contrasting these two approaches, I think it helps us to appreciate both of them better. Both work well, but in very different ways, and that just fascinates me. And I hope it fascinated you. If it did, feel free to check out some of the other videos on my channel where I analyze TV shows and movies, and please consider subscribing. I hope to see you next time. Bye!